For this video lecture, so we will have the next topic under Module 1. So we will discuss about the elements of an assurance engagement. Okay, so we have here the following elements of assurance engagement. So we will discuss each of them in our next slides. Okay, so for the first element, so we have the three-party relationship between the responsible party, practitioner, and intended users. Okay, so in our previous video lecture, so we have already introduced these three parties. Okay, but here we will still review who these different parties involved in an assurance engagement. So the first is the responsible party. So we've mentioned before that we mean here as we refer the responsible party as the management who prepares the subject matter that needs to be evaluated in an assurance engagement. So for example, if our subject matter is financial statements, so basically the FS was prepared by the accounting department, which is part of the organization or the management. So they are the ones who are presenting the FS, okay, to be used by the intended users. However, the reliability or the credibility of FS is not that high. So therefore, they will undergo assurance engagement so that the expression of the opinion of the practitioner will enhance the confidence of our intended users, okay, as in their confidence to use the financial statements because it is now more credible than it is not than that of unaudited or the FS which has not undergone an assurance engagement service. Okay, so this is the responsible party. So the next is the practitioner. So again, we mean the practitioner as the independent CPA or CPA firm that offers assurance engagement services to their clients. And lastly, the third part or party in this relationship is the intended user. So we mean here as the stockholders and others who may be using the financial statements for their economic decision making. Okay, so this is how these three are related. Okay, so the practitioner here serves as someone who bridges the gap between the responsible party and the intended users, okay, as to the subject matters the subject matter at hand under assurance engagement. Okay, so the next or the second element is appropriate subject matter. Okay, so subject matter in an assurance engagement is something that is the concern or the topic or the document or something that needs to be evaluated. Okay, so the subject matter can be a financial performance or condition. So typically this is the financial statements. Okay, the next is our subject matter can also be non-financial performance or conditions. Okay, another is we can also use the physical characteristics as our subject matter, the systems and processes, as well as the behavior. So meaning to say anything that is identifiable and can be evaluated, we can use it as our subject matter for the assurance engagement. So we have here the following characteristics of the subject matter for it to be acceptable and to be considered appropriate. Okay, so first, it has to be identifiable. So meaning to say, we are able to determine, okay, what is that type of subject, okay, that we will undergo or evaluate in an assurance engagement. Being it identifiable, so as mentioned earlier, it should be capable of evaluation or measurement against the identified criteria. Okay, so another is the information also about the subject matter should be subjected to procedures for gathering our sufficient appropriate evidence, meaning to say that particular subject matter should be or should have evidences in which the auditor could rely or could base his expression of conclusion. Okay, so there has to be evidence that is available to be gathered for the expression of the conclusion. Okay, so either for a reasonable assurance or limited assurance, whichever is appropriate or whichever may the practitioner and the management may have agreed, okay, in the pre-engagement of this process or service. Okay, another element of an assurance engagement is this suitable criteria. Okay, so criteria, when we say criteria, these are the benchmark that we use to evaluate or measure the subject matter. So it should include the presentation of the subject matter as well as the disclosure. So in this case, for example, if our subject matter is financial statements, so the suitable criteria for that, the benchmark that we will use to evaluate or measure the financial statements is our PFRS. Okay, so that is our criteria. Okay, so we have generally we have two types of criteria. So we have the formal and less formal criteria. For the formal criteria, okay, so the same as what I have mentioned earlier. So an example is for the financial statements, so we can use either IFRS or PFRS as our benchmark or criteria. Okay, another is, for example, if our subject matter is internal control, so the criteria to be used is that of the established internal control framework or control objectives that is designed for the engagement. Another example is if our subject matter is compliance report, so the criteria that we can use is the applicable law, regulation, or contracts. Okay, for the less formal criteria, these are internally developed code of conduct or agreed level of performance. Meaning to say, the criteria or the benchmark is internally generated, which is only used within the organization and is not available for public use or for the use of other entities. Okay, so that is for the less formal criteria. Okay, so the following are the characteristics of a criteria for it to be considered suitable. Okay, first, our criteria should be relevant. Okay, so relevant means the criteria should contribute to the conclusion that assists decision making by the intended users. So relevance means something that will influence the decision making of the users. Okay, so here, if we have or if our criteria is relevant, so there is a strong reliability, okay, of the expression of the opinion of the practitioner because they used relevant criteria. So meaning the decisions of the intended users will also be sound, okay, because they used a relevant criteria. Another is our criteria should be complete. So meaning to say all the relevant factors should be considered, especially those which can affect the conclusion, okay, or the decisions of the intended users. So there should not any circumstance or other things that should be omitted, okay, especially those which are relevant and important. So complete criteria will include or should include benchmarks for presentation and disclosure. So presentation is how the subject matter is being prepared and organized, while the disclosure, on the other hand, is our supporting documents and explanations of what we can see from the face of the main document of the subject matter. Okay. So next, our criteria for in order for it to be considered as suitable, so it must be reliable also. So reliability means the criteria will allow consistent evaluation or measurement of the subject matter, and this evaluation will be used by the qualified practitioners. So here, aside from the criteria, also the practitioner should be reliable, or qualified to use that, and they are also well versed of that criteria, okay, that they are using in evaluating the subject matter. Okay. Another is criteria should also be neutral, meaning to say it must be free from any bias. Okay. And lastly, it should be understandable. So meaning it should be clear, comprehensive, and should not be subject to significantly different interpretations by the different users or parties. Okay, so when using this criteria, they should arrive at the same interpretation and decision. Okay, so those are the different characteristics of criteria for it to be considered suitable. Okay, the next element is sufficient appropriate evidence. Okay, so here from this description, okay, we can describe a sufficient appropriate evidence by getting the important phrases from this description. So let us read the full description first. So the practitioner plans and perform an assurance engagement with an attitude of professional skepticism to obtain sufficient appropriate evidence about whether the subject matter is free from material misstatement. So the practitioner will also consider materiality, assurance engagement risk, and the quantity and quality of the available evidence when planning and performing the engagement. So in particular, when determining the nature, timing, and extent of evidence gathering procedures. Okay, so from this description, okay, so we can get this phrase to describe further what sufficient appropriate evidence is and how the practitioner should perform evidence gathering. Okay, so first, the practitioner should have the attitude of professional skepticism. So when we say skepticism or being skeptic, this is when you are given a particular document. So let us use an example of the financial statements. So the practitioner was provided by the financial statements, so that is our subject matter, okay, for the assurance engagement. So upon looking and receiving the document, so here at this time or at that moment, the practitioner will not believe that the financial statements is in accordance with PFRS, nor will he believe that this is not in accordance with PFRS, or in other words, he cannot tell at that moment whether that financial statement is reliable or not. So he needs some proof or evidence to support his belief or later his opinion. Okay, so that is being skeptical. Okay, so here you should always do and gather evidence to support whatever opinion he may express later on in his audit assurance or in his assurance report. Okay, so meaning you should not believe anything unless you have evidence, okay, to support your belief. That is being skeptical. Okay, so this is true also in an assurance engagement. Okay, so the next is sufficient appropriate evidence. So here, if you are the practitioner, so you should use your professional judgment, follow the standards on auditing, and the code of conduct in performing the assurance engagement, especially in the gathering of evidences, for you to be able to get only what is sufficient and what is appropriate. Okay, because in the conduct of an assurance engagement, especially in the evidence gathering, so there are a lot of information that you can get, and there are a lot of people that you can ask. But the question is that information enough for you to support your conclusion or opinion? Okay, or is that relevant or reliable? So that's how evidence gathering should be. So here, the auditor or the practitioner should always bear in mind that not all available information can be used as evidence. So he should evaluate that based on the criteria and the scope as well of the engagement. Okay. Another is materiality. Okay, so you have been introduced to this term. So basically, when we say materiality, it has something to do with the amount. So how great is that amount to a certain entity? So for example, if 100 pesos is minimal or not material to you, it may be material to others, especially for those who have a small or lesser scale enterprise or business enterprise. So the practitioner should also consider the materiality level of a certain entity in gathering evidence. So for example, if the practitioner is evaluating an account, let us say for example accounts receivable. Okay, so here the amount of accounts receivable will depend on the size also, and the capability of the business entity, if that amount is considered to be material for them or immaterial. Okay, so that's one thing that's also important, especially in gathering evidence. So for example, if the entity sets, or for the entity 100 is material, so anything that amounts to 100 and above will be considered material. Okay, so those amounts below 100, it may not be included in the evidence gathering because it has no great impact, okay, on, or that difference has no great impact on the financial statements or on the decision makers. Okay. Another is assurance engagement risk. So before, we have mentioned about the risk that the practitioner may commit in the performance of an assurance engagement. So here, risks are inevitable. Okay, so but in the conduct of assurance engagement, the practitioner should make a procedure or plan, okay, on how to minimize this risk. Okay, so risk can be the risk that the auditor will not detect any deviation from the criteria or misstatement, or he may detect misstatement or deviation, but actually it is not a misstatement. Okay, so because of the inherent nature of the practitioner that he is also human, so he is susceptible to errors. Okay, but again, for an assurance engagement, it should be, or the risk should be acceptable, or below the acceptable level of the risk. Okay, so lastly, all of those things should be considered by the auditor in the nature, timing, and extent of the evidence gathering procedures. So he will consider being skeptical, the evidence should be sufficient and appropriate. Materiality will also be considered, as well as the risk. Okay, in the nature, timing, and extent of the evidence gathering procedures. And another thing, in the evaluation, for example, of an account in the financial statements, so the auditor should also consider the nature of that account, the timing on how or when he will get the evidence. Is it in the beginning of the year, or in the end, or in the middle? Okay, so because there is the right timing on when to gather the evidence. Okay, for example, inventory. So inventory can be a surprise count or visit, but most likely they would use the year-end physical counting of the inventory to assure that it is the same, or the amount that is being reflected in the financial statements is the same as that of the physical inventory in their warehouse. Okay, and the extent also, how much of the evidence should be gathered, because as mentioned earlier, not all the available information should be used as the evidence. There might be something there that is not relevant or reliable to the expression of the conclusion and for the decision makers as well.